Welcome to my channel Metachondria, where you can learn precise treatment of diseases that come under metabolic syndrome. It can be diabetes, hypertension, obesity, dyslipidemia, or hypercholesterolemia. In this video, we'll learn practical aspects of glycated hemoglobin and another concept called HOMA-IR. Because we use glycated hemoglobin in and around, like to diagnose diabetes, to monitor response to anti-diabetic medications. Learning about this is very important. Okay, what is glycated hemoglobin? So it is a non-enzymatic addition, okay, of glucose to beta chain of hemoglobin. Imagine this is hemoglobin, this is the beta chain. What happens? Glucose binds to this beta chain of hemoglobin. So then there is HbA1c formation. Why should you understand that this is non-enzymatic? See, because whenever it's non-enzymatic, the HbA1c levels will correlate directly with blood glucose levels. It means that if the blood glucose levels are high, glycated hemoglobin percentage is also high. It's a linear relation. So if this is blood glucose and this is HbA1c, they have linear. As and when the glucose levels rise, the HbA1c also starts rising. What would happen if it was enzymatic? If it was enzymatic, then to one extent it would be linear, but once the enzyme got saturated, it would become a plateau. This is not the case in glycated hemoglobin. So understanding that this is a non-enzymatic addition is also very important. So next, normally only less than 5%, 5.7% of the hemoglobin in our body is glycated. If it increases, it is either pre-diabetes or diabetes. So 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic and 6.5 or more is diabetes. So it depicts blood glucose levels for the past 90 days. This is very important. You know what happens? Whenever, what was the problem with fasting and postprandial was, these diabetic patients, what they do, okay, if they are planning to get fasting and postprandial tomorrow, they'll start dieting from today, so that their fasting comes less, and also they'll have tiffin, like daily they would have idli dosa, but on the day of blood testing they will have only upma, that very small amount of upma. This can alter the FBS and PPBS levels. But HbA1c, it will show you it doesn't matter what they ate yesterday, what they ate today morning. It will show you how they control their glucose levels for the past 90 days or 3 months. So why is it 90 days? It corresponds to the lifespan of RBCs. Lifespan of RBCs. There are various journals, like some books say 8 to 10 weeks, some say up to 120 days, but you can actually remember 90 days. It will show you glucose control for the past 90 days. Now, because we use this in and out, you should always know, when you should be very cautious about glycated hemoglobin levels. There are certain conditions which can actually show false low HbA1c. There are some conditions that can show false high HbA1c levels. So what you should remember is, if there is any condition that is reducing the lifespan of RBCs, that will show falsely low HbA1c levels. On the contrary, if there is any condition which is increasing the lifespan of RBCs, that will show you false high HbA1c levels. Okay, so conditions that decrease RBC lifespan or dilute the blood will show false low. Conditions that increase the lifespan of RBCs show false high glycated hemoglobin levels. In this context, you should remember iron deficiency anemia and B12 deficiency anemia. This is very rampant in India. You might find a diabetic patient anemic as well. Anemia is very common in India. So what you should do in that case, first treat anemia, get the hemoglobin to normal level, and then you will be able to correlate glycated hemoglobin levels with the sugar control. Okay, when you start treatment in anemic patient, you should always keep in mind that these are This is slightly higher than what is expected in the patient. Okay, so this is very important. Remembering that iron deficiency anemia and vitamin B12 deficiency anemia, they show false high levels of glycated hemoglobin. Whereas the lifespan, any disease that reduces the lifespan of RBCs like hemolytic anemia, spherocytosis, thalassemia disease, sickle cell anemia, pregnancy. In pregnancy, what happens? There is the volume, blood volume increases. That is why there is false low glycated hemoglobin. Then if you see thalassemia and sickle cell anemia in different books, right? Some books will say it will show falsely high glycated hemoglobin. Some books will say it will show falsely low glycated hemoglobin. Don't be confused with that. Remember, if it's a proper disease, okay, where the lifespan of RBCs have reduced, then it will show false low hemoglobin, low glycated hemoglobin. On the contrary, if it's a trait, it's not a proper disease. There is some concept called as thalassemia trait, sickle cell trait, right? This can be variable. You cannot predict if it's showing false low or false high. But if it's a proper manifested disease, it will show high. Any thalassemia patient, imagine blood transfusion will also show false low glycated hemoglobin levels. Imagine there is a thalassemia patient who underwent blood transfusion recently, and if you are seeing that the blood glycated hemoglobin is within normal limits, it might be showing false low results. So you should be very cautious about that. On the contrary, if a patient is the patient has iron deficiency anemia and the patient is diabetic and his HbA1c is showing 8.5, you should always remember that it is slightly higher than what was expected. Okay. Then vitamin supplementation, cholesterol levels, thalassemia, sickle cell anemia trait, it can be high or low. They vary. You cannot tell. So always remember about the false high, iron deficiency anemia and megaloblastic anemia. In false low, hemolytic anemia, spherocytosis, hemoglobin manifested hemoglobinopathies, thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, and then pregnancy. Then, just like HbA1c shows you the control of the patient for the past 90 days, this glycated hemoglobin can be correlated with the average glucose levels. For example, if it is 5, right, the average glucose level of the patient will be somewhere middle will be 9, mean will be 97. It will be somewhere between 76 to 120. Similarly, 6 will be if a patient has HbA1c of 6, then the range will be the average blood glucose will be somewhere between 100 to 152. This will be important for the treatment. Okay, you won't be able to remember all these things. So what you can do is, how can you practically, in most of the labs, if the labs are really very good, along with glycated hemoglobin, they will also write average blood glucose level. But if they don't write, you have a very easy formula to estimate the average blood glucose. So the formula will be HbA1c multiply the glycated hemoglobin with 20. So HbA1c into 20, and for the answer, add the same answer but without 0, plus the same without 0. I'll tell you. Imagine a patient has glycated hemoglobin of 6. 6, we will multiply this by 20. So 6 into 20 will become 120. For this 120, add the answer but without 0. So 120 plus 12, it comes to 132. So this will be the average blood glucose level. This is not the exact, but this is a handy formula that you can use to estimate the average blood glucose levels in case the lab is not providing you with it. Same thing, 7. So we'll do same thing, 7 into, we will multiply it with 20. It becomes 140. Now for 140, you will add the same number but without 0. So 140 plus 14, it comes to 154. Right? If you're confused, let me take one more. 8. 8 twos are 16. So 160 plus 16, it comes to 176. Roughly near to it. This is how you calculate average blood glucose levels. Now, this is new thing. Homeostasis model assessment for insulin resistance. We have parameters to calculate, to identify fasting glucose, to measure insulin, but the parameters to measure insulin resistance are something which we speak less often. So, HOMA-IR or homeostasis model assessment for insulin resistance is one parameter through which you can actually measure the insulin resistance. The basic concept of this is in normal individuals, if the glucose levels are low, the insulin levels are also low, right? But what happens in insulin resistance? To maintain the same range of glucose, the patient will now need higher glucose, higher insulin levels. Here what is done is it measures the insulin resistance. So you will multiply fasting glucose level with fasting insulin level and divide it by 22.5. So fasting insulin level into fasting glucose level divided by 22.5. If you see various journals, some show nanomoles, some show micromoles, some show picomole. Okay, don't get confused. All are correct. It's just conversion. They would have converted into different units. Okay. The easiest one is this millimoles per liter. Fasting glucose is in millimoles per liter and fasting insulin is in microunits per liter. Both are both denominator is liter for both, numerator is for both. For glucose it's millimole per liter, for insulin it is microunits per liter. This is the easiest formula that you can remember. Okay. There was a journal which was published in 2022 by Indian Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism. According to the study, they told that 1.23 would be ideal cutoff for India. Like when you measure a patient's insulin glucose and calculate HOMA-IR, right? For India, the cutoff would be 1.23, ideal cutoff. But anything less than 2.5, you can consider it as normal. More than that, it depicts insulin resistance. So that's from my side. This was a brief video on glycated hemoglobin and HOMA-IR. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any doubts, you can put it in the comment section. Okay.